Hey everybody, AJ here. Welcome to the first video in a series I'll be doing where I demonstrate web tips and tricks and utilities and things like that that's going to be focused to AV programmers and AV integrators to help you take web projects and kind of customize them to be something designed for an AV system as opposed to a typical web page. In this first video, we'll be going over Tailwind CSS, and I'll show you just how easy it is to use this to create panels quickly with design to speed up that whole process. Some other things in further videos down the series is I'll be going into how to create drag and drop functionality, how to use state management, call third-party APIs, create animations. Basically everything that I'm going to cover in this series is going to be focused for the AV side of things to utilize the web for AV. So without further ado, let's get started and let's learn Tailwind CSS. Okay, here we are at tailwindcss.com. The website is a great resource. I have it open all the time. They have some of the best documentation I've ever seen, and it really makes it easy to understand and easy to implement. So I'm just going to go over here to the docs section. On the left-hand side of the docs section, they have literally everything that you can do in Tailwind CSS in there. And you can actually then just click on each of these and it will show you the classes that you can use as well as examples of everything. So you can see, you know, they showcase how everything works. It's really an absolute fantastic tool to have in your tool belt when working with web projects and designing them from an AV perspective. It takes a lot of the complexities of CSS out. So this is what we will be using to make designs tailored to run on an AV panel. So here's the documentation. Let's go and let's get our project set up. All right, for this project, we're going to be using React. So we're going to do npx create React app, and then we'll give our app a name of CH5 Tailwind, and we will let it do its thing. So it's going to go now and install all the dependencies and everything needed to make this project. All right, once everything is installed, we're going to go into the directory and we're going to open the project in VS Code with the code space period. And here's our newly created project. Okay, so now that we have the project created for React, we're going to get Tailwind CSS set up in here. So I'm in the docs, and inside the docs, I'm going to search for React. And now it's going to lay out exactly what we need to do to get Tailwind set up. So I'm going to copy the install, and this is going to install Tailwind CSS and initialize it in the project. Okay. And now we're going to switch over to the project. And you see we have this new Tailwind config.js file, and we're going to go into it, and we are going to copy and paste this content section in like so. And we're also going to, enable JIT mode, which is a just-in-time compiler for Tailwind CSS. The next thing that we need to do is get the CSS actually set up for the React app to use it. So we're going to go into index.css. We're going to highlight all this and we're going to get rid of it. And then we're going to copy this down here and put that in there and save it. Okay. And so the other thing that we want to do is we no longer need this app.css file because in app.js we don't need that anymore. So we are going to delete that and we're going to remove it from the import there. So now we have Tailwind initialized. It was just that easy. And so now that it's initialized, let's start the React app and watch what happens when we start to use Tailwind. Okay, let's start our React project. In the terminal, we're going to run npm run start, and this is going to fire up the React application. And once that gets started, it's going to open up this page that is going to look really ugly because we no longer have any CSS applied. So just to show you real quickly the power of Tailwind, I'm going to highlight all this and delete it. And I'm going to make a new div. Let's delete this logo file. We don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to put a paragraph in here that says, welcome to Tailwind CSS. Okay. Again, rather ugly. But now we'll get into where Tailwind is fantastic. So we're going to say the height's going to be the screen. We're going to do a background of gray 400. And as soon as I hit save, you see instantly things are starting to really change. There's a whole bunch of built-in colors that you can use, but you can also customize those, again, everything in the documents. Now to see just how easy it is to center something, so I can say this is flex, item center, justify center, and just like that, I've centered that text and the whole page. Now if I wanted to make some adjustments to the font itself, I can say this text is 2XL. One other thing to note, when you have the snippets plugged in, the extensions in, it'll actually tell you what it's doing in CSS. So while Tailwind is going to do all this stuff for you, it still helps you by understanding when you apply this name, what is actually happening behind the scenes, which is always good. So it helps you learn at the same time. So we're going to say text 2XL, and we're going to say font bold. And just like that, I have quickly and easily changed the background color, centered everything in the middle of the screen, and made text modifications, and it was just that easy. So now that we've done that, let's actually start to apply this logic to start making an AV design that's going to go on a touch panel. One other thing I wanted to showcase before we get into doing that is utilizing developer tools to showcase the different sizes of panels. So if I go into developer tools, I can click this little responsive design, the device toolbar here, and you'll see it will change to show this. But if I actually click this drop down, you see I have some custom ones that I've built in here. So I have a 10-inch panel, 5-inch panel, 5-inch portrait, and 7. So if I go in and I click edit, you'll see here, let me slide this over real quick. So you'll see here that I've created these things, and if I edit them, I've actually put in the resolutions and noted that the user agent string was mobile because it's a touch interface. And so I have all these dimensions set up inside of here so that when I am running this and testing it, I can simply change this to show what it would look like on all these panels. So a very handy tool to have when you're designing something and you want to see what it's going to look like on that panel, which we'll be doing when we go through the breakpoints. All right, so now let's get started designing the touch interface. The first thing I'm going to do is actually go back into this Tailwind config.js file, and I'm going to extend the theme to create a new breakpoint. So I'm going to say extend, and then I'm going to say screens, and I'm going to make a new one called HD with a breakpoint of 1920 pixels. So basically what that says is anytime a screen has a width of 1920 pixels, it's going to apply whatever modifiers we're told for that size. By default, Tailwind does not have anything to create just for this specific size. It basically applies it. Their biggest is 2XL, which is in the 1500s range. So I always create this one for the HD desktops or touch panels. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to come back in here, and we're going to make this look like a big section up top with a bottom nav bar at the bottom. So a typical AV device or AV UI. So I'm going to stick with height screen, but then we're going to say overflow hidden, which is going to stop them from being able to scroll off the page. And then I'm going to use some Flexbox. So I'm going to say it's a flex, but it's a column. And I'm going to make this BG gray 500. And now I'm going to add a two divs here. So 1 and 2. So these are the two pieces of the screen. And I'm going to say that this one needs to grow, meaning it's going to fill up the available space. And then on this one, I'm actually going to set its height that I want it to be, which tells the other one to grow to fill the rest. So we're just going to do height 32, and we're going to say that this one has a background of slate 700, and we're actually going to give the background a little opacity. So we're going to say background opacity 7, and I'm going to hit save. And so you see, just by doing that, now all of a sudden we have the nice big section for the control and everything up top, and I have this bottom thing here to be where you're going to put all the icons. So just to show you other ways that we could do this, so we could say you wanted a top and bottom. Then all I got to do is copy this guy here and hit save, and now you see I got a top, a middle, and a bottom. And again, you can change this height. So if I only wanted this one to be very skinny, I just changed the height of that one to a lot smaller. Let's say I didn't want to do the navigations on the top and the bottom, but I wanted to have a menu on the left instead of the top and bottom. So to do that's very simple. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this guy here. And I'm no longer going to use column. I'm going to use a regular flex. And then I'm going to change this to be width 12. And when I save that, you see now, actually let's make this a little bit bigger. So now you see I have a menu on the left with the content and control section on the right. So very simple to tweak and modify using Tailwind CSS as opposed to traditional CSS where it would take a lot more work to quickly make these changes. So we're going to go back to the original example here. So we're just going to undo a whole bunch of stuff here, and we're going to delete this. So we're going to go back to this idea. All right, let's fancy it up a little bit. So I'm actually going to do a background gradient on this. So instead of the boring BG gray 500, I'm going to do a gradient. So I'm going to say BG gradient to bottom right. And now when I do that, I can do a from, which is going to be the color it's going to come from. And I always spell this word wrong. Fuchsia. So we're going to say from fuchsia 500 to indigo 600. And you see, by using that gradient and all these built-in colors, I've quickly made a nicer looking background. And again, the bottom, because it has that little bit of opacity, it kind of helps bleed it through. So if I deleted that, it would make it a lot more solid. But by adding that opacity, it gives it a much better look and feel. So we'll bump this up to 75. Okay, so now we have our nice background and our bar at the bottom. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to do some adjustments based on the screen sizes, right? So if I look here, the 7-inch panel looks like that. The 10-inch panel's got this littler one, and then the 5-inch panel's got this giant thing. So let's say I want to start making some adjustments so that this bottom bar's size, its height changes based on the screen size. So I'm going to start with height 32, but then I'm going to say XL is height 24. So right here it's telling you, so when it hits minimum width of 1280, it's going to change the height of this thing to the 24 size. So this is going to be your I think it's the 5-inch panels that have that resolution. And then I want to do one for the 10-inch panel. So I'm going to say HD, and this is that new breakpoint that we just added. And I'm going to give it a height of 36. And I'm going to save that. So you see instantly on the 7-inch, it got a little smaller. And now if I go to the 10-inch, really you don't see any difference, right? Because I'm making these changes based on the screen size so that they all kind of look exactly the same. And if I go to 5-inch, again, you see that thing has shrunk. So by using these breakpoint modifiers, right? So this XL colon HD colon, essentially what it's telling Tailwind to do is when the screen is this size, change the height to this. Otherwise, always have this height. And if I remove this HD, it's going to say anytime the screen size is 1280 or above, change the height to 24. But I want to go even further by doing the HD one with the height of 36. So that's what these modifiers are for. And these modifiers work on pretty much everything. So you can adjust font size and button size and all kinds of things that you can modify based on the size of the screen. So it really gives you the power to build one web interface that works on any device, all scaled very nicely. So now that we've done this, let's now create some buttons on the bottom row and have the content section update when we do that. Okay, so the first thing for the buttons that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array of buttons. Okay, and then in each of these buttons is going to be an object, and we're going to say its name. So we'll give this one the name of computer, and then we're going to add 4 buttons. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So we're going to do this. And so this one's name will be laptop, and I'm going to make 2 more of these. And we'll say this one's BYOD and this one is .cam. So now I have 4 buttons that I can use to essentially make these on the bottom row. So we're going to go down into this section, which is the bottom piece, the bottom bar, and we're going to map over that array to generate the buttons on the screen. Now, if what I'm going into is a little, it's a little much, you don't really understand it yet, I don't actually go into, how to use React and things like that. There are plenty of resources on the internet to be able to do that. So, you can look those up, or if there are certain things you would like me to cover, you can certainly ask. But we're going to essentially iterate over this. So we're going to say buttons.map because we're going to map over them. And then we're going to do a functional thing here where we do this. And I'm going to say each of these has an item and an index. And now I'm going to return a button. And in each one of these buttons, it's going to be the item.name because we're referencing the name here. And then because we are using a map, I'm going to use key so that it knows each of these is unique, and I'm going to give it the index. And so just by doing that, you see down here, we have no styling, so it kind of looks like that. But you see it just generated over all of them. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to turn this bottom bar into Flexbox. So we're going to say flex and justify evenly. And so now you see it has put those in there, but because of the text and everything, it's really hard to see. So now we're going to put some styling on the buttons themselves. So for the buttons, we're going to say width 24, border gray 200 with a border. If I wanted the border to be thicker, I could use a dash. Otherwise, I just say border. We're going to make the buttons kind of rounded. So we're going to say rounded MD. And then we're also going to say text gray 200. And now you see we have some buttons starting to form. Okay. Let's put some padding in the bottom bar itself. So we're going to say px-2. px will add padding to the left and the right. And then we can say py2, like that. Or if we wanted to just apply padding to all four corners, which I'm going to do, I'm just going to say p-4. And it's going to add that padding to all four sides of this entire bottom piece. So now you can see I have my four buttons here with the color and the wording and everything is starting to take shape. So now that we've done that, let's start looking at how we update the information in the middle section here. So in this middle section, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to turn this back into Flex. So we're going to say Flex, item center, justify center. And just to give you an idea to show you what it looks like, we'll say go like this. If I can spell today. Boy, I really can't spell today. And so you'll see that starts to take shape there. If I really wanted to see it better, again, just like before, I can say text gray 50, and then we'll say text 4XL. And so now you can see there's that option. So the idea is we want this to update every time one of these buttons is pressed. So to do that, we are going to use state inside of React. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the ability to do this. So we're going to say import from React, and we want use state. So you can think of this as a way to store what's being done inside of React. So we're going to say const, and we're going to make it an array, and we're going to say use state, and we're going to give it 0. And we're going to say active set active. Okay. Now on these buttons, we're going to make an on-click event. And on the click, you'll see why I use 0 here in a second. We're going to say set active and the index. So the index is referring to what part of this array was just clicked. Okay. And now what we're going to change here is we're going to say buttons, whichever one is active, dot name. And so when I do that, you see it says computer. If I click laptop, it says laptop, BYOD.cam, etc. So essentially what I'm doing is when I click the button, I'm setting the active to the index in the array, and then the text is updating that says, okay, give me the buttons array, and I want whichever one is currently active, and I want its name, and I'm going to show that on the screen. So there is a very basic step 1. I'm going to make a quick modification here because I don't like how those buttons look, so I want to shrink them just a little bit. So now that we've done that, let's now fancy up those buttons a little bit, and let's start adding some icons. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install a package that contains a whole bunch of icons from different icon providers. So we're going to say npm i react icons. And this is going to install a package that has a whole bunch of icons that we can utilize. So now that we've done that, let's go up here and we're going to import some icons to use on our buttons. So we're going to say import from React icons, and then the first ones I'm going to use are from an AI. If you go to npm.js and you search for React icons, you'll see in here the documentation on how to use everything, and then it shows you all the different things that you can do for the React icons. And actually, I think if you go to this home page, it goes even further in depth on that. So that's what we're using. So for the first one, I'm going to do an AI, and as I type, it will start to show you everything that's available. So I'm looking for outline laptop, and I'm looking for outline desktop. So I'm going to import those, and then I'm also going to import some from FI. And these I want AirPlay, and I want a video button. So now we're going to update this buttons array to include the icons. So I'm going to say icon, and for this one it's going to be AI outline desktop. On this one I'm going to say icon, I'm going to say AI outline laptop. So you kind of get what I'm doing here. I'm adding this to the array so that when it's mapping over things, it knows what to do. And FI video. Now we need to use these, right? We've imported them. They're not showing up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to modify these buttons. So we are going to say inside of here, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this button so things line up correctly. So we're going to say flex cal item center and justify center. We're also going to make the text smaller, so we're going to say text small. So that shrinks the text down a little bit. So now we're going to add these icons. So to do that, I do item.icon, and now we're going to apply some stylings to them. So we're going to give them a height of 7 and a width of 7. And so now you see we have started to make the icons appear with the button word. Again, we can still press these, still does its thing, all that. If I wanted to make these a little bit different, so instead of justify center, I could say justify between. Maybe I wanted to then say PY4 to kind of push them in. So again, you see as you start to play with Tailwind, by making these small modifications, I can easily modify the way these buttons look. But now there's a glaring issue, right? When we click these buttons, we can see that it's changing in the top, but we don't actually know that the buttons are changing. So we are going to do some JavaScript inside of the CSS. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this class, and I'm going to delete all this stuff here. And to do that, we do curly braces with the tick marks. And so what do we want, right? Well, let me comment this out. We want to know if the button is active, we want to change something, right? So that feedback state, that typical feedback state that you would use in something like VT Pro or something like that. So to do that, we're going to access some variables. So we're going to look for active. And if active equals the index of this item, we're going to say when that happens, and we do that by using this and symbol, which means that when this is true, you're going to do this. And so when that happens, we're going to say that we actually want the border to then be transparent, and we want to change the background of everything to indigo 600. But then we're also going to apply a scale change to it. So we're going to make it a little smaller. Okay. Now we're going to take this other stuff that we did, and we're just going to apply it down here. So we're going to say we're going to put that width of 24 back in, the border gray 200, the rounded. And so essentially what we're doing is it says when this is true, apply these things. Otherwise, apply everything down here. So this is basically, this section here is overriding what is being applied here. Okay, so we do text gray 400. We're going to add something called transform and duration of 200. So what this does is instead of it looking instantaneous when the button goes active, it's going to add a little bit of animation to it to make it better looking. And then we'll put our Flexbox, so our flex cal, our item center, our justify between, our py4, and our text small. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this whole thing here. So I don't want to delete all that. I just want to delete this. Okay. And so now that I've done that and I click save, voila, now our button has feedback. So if I start clicking them, you'll see that things start to change. And you see how it's nice and smooth looking? That's what that transform and duration are doing. So transform is saying when anything makes a change, we're going to apply an animation to it. And the duration is basically how long do you want that transition to take effect for. So, I could go crazy. I could say, oh, I want, I think duration 400 is a value. So I could say I want it duration 400. And yeah, that's not really duration. I think 300 is one. So I could say I want a duration of 300. And so it's just exaggerating how many milliseconds that animation is taking effect. Duration 200 is usually a pretty good one. So now we have our buttons with feedback. We have the middle section updating. So everything's starting to look good. And again, if I change these, so if I go back to the 7-inch panel, I actually need to update some padding here. So I only want this on XL, and on HD I want HD to have the PY of 4. And then I'm going to change this one as well. So on HD I want that, but on the smaller screen I want PY of 4, so that you can see things start to take shape here. Again, I'm using all these modifiers, right? So on HD I want justify between, otherwise I want justify center. So you can see by adding all these modifiers that I'm doing here, you're watching as these buttons start to change based on the size of the screen, right? So if I go back to the 10-inch panel, it looks like that. Maybe on the 10-inch panel I want the text to be a little bit bigger, so I can say HD text base, and so it's going to bump that font up a little bit. So again, 5-inch panel, that's what the 5-inch panel is looking like. That's what the 7-inch panel is looking like. And even the portrait one understands what to do, right? The portrait one understands, oh, I need to look like this. So very, very good use of those modifiers. So we're going to go back to the 7-inch panel. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start making this top section here look like it has some sections where you would put your control buttons. And then we'll show how to do that. So for that, we're going to use CSS Grid. Okay, so for the grid, we're going to come back up to this section here, right? This was our middle, our main content section. We're actually just going to comment this one out. We're not going to use it anymore. So I'll leave it in there just as an example on how to do that. So we're going to create that new section, the new main section. And again, we're going to give it grow, except now we're going to do some CSS grid. So we're going to say grid. We're going to say grid cols 4. So essentially what grid cols 4 mean is there's going to be 4 evenly spaced columns across that main section. We're going to put a gap between all these items of 8, and I'm also going to add a margin of 8 to the whole thing. Okay. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to add some sections. So I'm going to add 2 more divs. And so for this first div, I'm going to say BG gray 200. I'm going to give it an opacity of 80, so it's a little see-through. I'm going to give it a shadow, and I'm going to say rounded MD. And so by doing that, now I have this first section box over here, right? But maybe we want a smaller one here and a larger one on the right side. So that's why I use this cols 4, right? So right now, by default, they only take up 1 column. So I have 1 column of the 4 being taken up. So this next one, I'm going to make it actually span the rest. So we're going to say BG gray 200, BG opacity 80, shadow XL, rounded MD. But here's where the little trick comes into play. We're going to say col span 3. So what that does is it says take up the 3 remaining columns, this entire thing. And so now I have the first one that's only taking up 1 column and the second one that's taking up 3 columns. So you don't necessarily want to just do 2 or 3. By adding the number of columns, it allows you to kind of adjust that size. The other thing that you can do is apply modifiers to this, right? So say I go back over and I look at the 5-inch portrait panel. Okay, that looks a little weird. Okay, maybe in that one I want to change how many each of these span. So I can change that with those modifiers to change how many they span across. Again, using those modifiers comes in very handy. So say, you know, like for example, I only wanted this one to be on the XL and up. I want it to be col span 3. And so if I go to this 5-inch portrait, you see it's a little smaller. So then I could do something else where I say, okay, only from the XL I want it 4. Before that I want it 2. And so now I have 2 even boxes here. And when I go to the 7-inch panel, I'm back to the 4. Or the 10-inch panel, I'm back to the 4. So again, by using those modifiers, you can see how easily you can adjust what is being put on the screen. So now that we have those, let's put some text in there, right? So we're going to go to the first one, and I'm going to make a modification to the first one here, and I'm going to put a paragraph tag in, and I'm going to say the same thing we did before. So I'm going to say buttons active dot name, and now I'm going to style this a little bit. So we're going to say class name, we're going to center the text, we're going to make it a little bit bigger, we're going to make it font medium, and we're going to move it down from the top. So we're going to give it a margin top of 2. And what that does is just moves it down a little bit. So now I've added that into the first one here. And so you can see I now have the word computer there. And as I click through, everything is updating. So these are some of the very very basics of using Tailwind CSS, but you can see the power that is available and how to use the modifiers and things like that. All right, there you have it. That's the intro to using Tailwind CSS. Great tool for styling and designing touch panels with HTML. Be on the lookout for more videos where I'll go into more functionality like I mentioned before. Hit the subscribe button. That way you get automatically notified when I release videos. And until next time, I'll see you.